Growing interest in Korea has prompted one university to host a 6-week study session to this part of the world to experience firsthand the country's society and its culture. So how was the Korea Study Abroad program set up? What has been the response from the students? And are there ways to enhance such learning experiences? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today, we speak about the growing interest in Korea, including its society and culture among students abroad. For this, I have Professor 윌리엄헤이즈 from Gonzaga University here in the studio. Professor Hayes, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's nice to meet you as well. Thank you.
I also have Professor Kang Yu-Kyung, also from Gonzaga University. Professor Kang, it's a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Right, Professor Hayes, we'll start with you. Let's begin then with the reasons behind the launch of the Korea Study program and the initial response, of course, from those around you.
Yeah. So a lot of it's because at Gonzaga University, so we're located in Spokane, Washington. We're the second largest city after Seattle. So in that university these days, because of the Korean wave, there's strong student interest in anything and everything about Korea. So they wanted some type of class like this. And traditionally at our university, we're more Eurocentric focused. We actually, study abroad programs began around 1963 in Florence, Italy. And we actually have a sister campus in Florence, Italy. So most of our students come and they expect to go to Europe. So this was a challenge and transformation in their thinking. And so we were quite successful. So it's both our location, it's student interest that's driven this program.
And what was the initial response to your proposal, perhaps, to start a study abroad program here in Korea?
Well, a lot of it was excitement and curiosity. What are you actually going to do? But also concerns, some fears from family members, from students and administrators. Because, of course, they mainly know about Korea through U.S. media. So they see things like North Korea or missile launches. So there's a great deal of fear and trepidation about coming to Korea. So part of our task is to allay those fears. And I think we did a good job. So we got a good group to come to Korea.
Right. And Professor Kang, do tell us a bit more about this program and also about your participation in it. Because I understand you're actually a professor of English at school.
Yes, I am. So this study abroad program is actually a 6-credit course. So 3 credits for Dr. Hayes and 3 credits for me. So he taught under the title of Korean State and Society. I taught it under Korea and Korean Englishes. So as a scholar and teacher of English, specifically writing studies, or we also call it rhetoric and composition, I took on a more interdisciplinary approach and not only bringing in writing studies, but also bringing in world Englishes and social linguistics. So what we did with the students is really looked at what English looks like in Korea, what it looks like, how it functions, and so forth. So we asked big questions like, what is the relationship with English and power, English and globalization, English and socioeconomic class, you know, all these realms of the society. So it's been a joy.
Right. And what was the focus of your study here?
So I do Korean State and Society. I originally came to Korea in 1987. And so at that time I was studying theology, Minjung theology, people's theology. But even then, churches were involved in the democratization movement. So off and on since then, I've focused on the relationship between the Korean state and society. So the emergence of a strong civil society, including news and media, is very important. So that's the dynamic that I'm looking at. So the changes in civil society over the past 30 years in Korea.
And what's your assessment thus far, that is, of the session here in Korea?
The session itself, I think, I'm biased, of course, but I think it was fantastic. The students, again, usually our students, if we set a bar for them, they'll reach for it. And throwing them into everyday life, doing complete immersion with them is quite a challenge, especially because they don't speak Korean. So getting them to overcome their fears. So this was a big puzzle for us, a challenge. So on the 3rd day here, I sent them on a scavenger hunt in the subway system. So they had to go from one end of Seoul to the other, trying to take pictures of different things. And of course, I knew they would get lost, but that was the purpose. I wanted them to overcome the fear of asking Koreans for help. right? Their directions. Where am I? How do I get here? And they were successful. By the afternoon, they reached their destination. So, we were extremely happy and pleased with it.
And staying with it, what was the response from the students with regard to that particular mission by Professor Hayes?
Well, I'm also biased, but I have evidence. It was overwhelmingly positive. So on the final day of our full day here at Korea, we had a debrief, and they really talked about how their worldview has expanded. Like Dr. Hayes mentioned, they grew up with a very Eurocentric view, right? So they were happy about that, and also they were very impressed with themselves, learned a lot about themselves as global citizens. So that was, we got a really good feedback from students.
Were they able to communicate with the people here, even when they're, because you mentioned earlier before the start of this program that they don't speak Korean?
Yeah, so that's actually that was one of our challenges. To be fully immersed, you need the language, right? But for the 6 weeks that we had, we didn't have time to educate them on language. So I think that's something that we will work on in the future, of maybe starting out with a language program before the 6-week program, and really so they can really participate.
Right. Professor Hayes, I understand the program included participation in the Wednesday demonstration here in capital Seoul that calls on Japan to redress the grievances of comfort women. What was the decision, or what was the decision based on to partake in the Wednesday demonstration?
As I said, I've been in and out of Korea since '87, involved with a lot of different social movements here. And so even in their first emergence in the 1990s, I attended the Wednesday demonstrations, and I've attended every decade since then. So I know I know where that demonstration will be at. I know the exact time of the demonstration, and I know the relative safety of it. And so what's important to know is the majority of our students at Gonzaga and the majority in the program are women. And so throughout the program, they were always asking questions and curious about women's issues because, again, Korea often emerges in the news due to that relationship, the gender inequalities in South Korea. So I knew by having this in the final week, it would give them that opportunity. So going in the morning to the War and Women's Human Rights Museum provided them a strong foundation, educational foundation. It gave them the context as well. And in our Jesuit education at Gonzaga, we really stress social justice, and they learn a great deal about social justice. And they understand themselves to be in solidarity with others around the world. So this was a perfect opportunity. And again, they wanted to give something back. They always think about reciprocity. So I was quite proud of them as they sat in the rain on Wednesday and they participated in the demonstration. And they understood why they were doing that. Although they couldn't quite understand all the Korean in terms of their placards that they were waving, they knew about the past and the present and ultimately the future around these gender issues. And that's what got them there, and that's why I brought them there.
What was their response during the debriefing at the end of the event?
They said that was one, if not it was one of the best experiences they had, because again, they felt like they were finally able to participate in Korean society rather than just receiving, and they could stand on their values. Like I said, when we train them, or our mission is to make them women and men with and for others. And the grandmothers of the comfort story, if that's not others, I don't know what is. And so again, for them, their heart was with them and they wanted to stand in solidarity.
Professor Hayes, what were some of the factors perhaps that you kept in mind while setting up this career study abroad program? Well,
as I've mentioned, Gonzaga is a Jesuit university, and so anytime we design courses, we have certain frameworks to work from. So first and foremost, I always think building their holistic knowledge of a society. So Jesuits stress critical thinking, speaking, and writing. And in order to do that, you have to understand how the different parts of a society fit together. So part of the program has to be giving them a wide vision, a holistic vision of what the Korean society is. Another aspect of Jesuit education is immersion in everyday life. They know what the classroom is. They've grown up in the classroom. The classroom in America and Korea look pretty similar. So I didn't want to bring them here and put them in another classroom. So many foreign students, when they come to Korea, sit in a classroom, whether it's learning Korean or learning things about Korean society. You could do that anywhere in the world in a classroom. What you cannot do in Gonzaga, in Spokane, is actually live in everyday life. So the immersion part was quite critical as well. And then the final thing, as I said, is showing them everything. Jesuits believe God is in all things, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So most tourists or most foreigners, when they come here, they're only shown the good things, the miracle story of the economy or politics. But they're not shown the social discontents. They're not shown the social inequalities. So that was the last factor. We had to show them everything, good, bad, and ugly.
I see. And that being said, Professor Kang, this is an impromptu question. Could you perhaps give me an example of one day in the curriculum for the students here in Korea?
So one day. So we did a lot of museums, not just demonstrations and going to all these companies, but we did a lot of museums. So we would get up in the morning. We would debrief what they had experienced the day before. And since this is a course, we gave out readings for them to read and reflect on and apply to give them a lens to how to look at what they are experiencing. So we would get up in the morning, debrief, and then go out to our next site, which could be a museum or a company, anywhere that we had in our itinerary. And then in the evening, we would give them some personal time because getting around in Seoul, in Korea, it was a lot for them, right? Coming from a very rural area in Spokane, coming here. So that is what our typical day looked like.
Right, I see. Professor Kang, would you say there's been a tangible shift perhaps in the perception of Korea, perhaps a greater interest in Korea among students overseas, especially in America, given the advances made by K-content in recent years?
Definitely. Just from my personal experience, I went to the States as a grad student, and as a grad student, I taught a lot of undergraduate students. And I remember, and this was many years ago, but even then, Korea was never brought up as a topic, or K-culture or K-pop. Even though it was popular in other Asian countries, it never penetrated into the US. But more recently, I find a lot of students so interested in wanting to talk about BTS, K-dramas, just so excited. And more recently, actually, this past spring semester, Dr. Hayes and I co-taught a course called The Korean Wave. First time ever at Gonzaga University. And we were only allowed to enroll 30 students, but we had a huge wait list. So that kind of is an evidence for that interest.
And the Korean Wave covered mostly the cultural content. Are we talking about movies, music, and dramas?
And beyond that. So as a society, so we look through the Korean society through these mediums and so much more.
Right. Professor Hayes, basically the program seeks to offer these kids a first-hand learning experience here in the country, including the good as well as the bad. All that being said, what do you suppose, or what aspect of the study was particularly of interest among the students?
Well, of course, because of the Korean Wave, several of them just wanted to focus on that. But again, in order to understand the Korean Wave, you have to go back. You have to understand the political, the previous regimes. You have to understand the economics as well. You have to understand the IMF crisis. You have to understand the opening of creativity, especially for young people. So when you have that background, then the Korean Wave begins to make sense to you. It just didn't appear out of nothing. So of course they come with the expectation of focusing on the Korean Wave, but again, we direct them to so many other experiences, and that's what they came away with. They talked about the such variety of experience, whether it was an LG Twins game on a Wednesday night, whether it's going to the DMZ. They talked about one night they stayed at Haeundae Beach late into the night talking on the sand and how meaningful that was. whether it's a trip to the 518 Memorial in Gwangju. All of these was such a range of variety of experiences, things that are out of their everyday life, right? And again, it's compressed together in 6 weeks. That variety of experience left the biggest impact on them. And then secondly, the reciprocity, able to give back to Korea. As a host nation, they felt like they kept taking and receiving. And so they look forward, like I said, to Wednesday, the demonstration. But then one of the last events was going to a English hagwon and then working with kindergarten students for 2 hours. That brought them so much joy, right? Because again, they could use their English in that way and they could work with the young kids. So they really loved that part, the reciprocity to give back.
Staying with that, Professor Kang, what more can you tell us about this last day experience at the hagwon, a cram school in Korea for young kids, for young children?
So they were very surprised that there were such hagwons for young kids, right? So it wasn't just, yes, they went in and gave back by teaching them, but also they were very interested in studying about why that is so in Korea, what specifics that has made these hagwons and English education start at a very early age, right? So it was a good opportunity for them to really experience that hands-on and think about it.
Right. Yeah. What would you highlight, Professor Kang, as perhaps some of the challenges in ensuring a productive, constructive learning experience with regard to the Korea study program here?
I think we mentioned it before briefly about language. Yes, language. That was one of the hardest things for the students have a more immersed experience. We needed that language, but that wasn't available. So that is one. But besides that, I think it comes with the size of the group. Having 14 students moving along from one location to another, all the logistics that went into it, finding housing, just finding a place to have discussions, right, conversations regarding the course and all. So that was, and I think we keep reiterating that we are faculty from a Jesuit institution, so we commit a lot to cura personalis, which means the care for the whole being. So it's not only academic part, but as faculty, we have to care for their individualism, right? There are 14 individuals with all different expectations and anticipations, personalities, characters. So kind of balancing that was a little bit of a challenge for us, a meaningful challenge, and also trying to balance out personal time with academic time and so forth. So yeah, there were many. I only mentioned a few. There were definitely challenges.
Right, I'm sure. And as a professor in the Department of English, Professor Kang, what are your thoughts with regard to English education here in Korea? I know it's a very general question. You can give me a very general response.
That's a huge education. As someone who grew up in Korea with all the primary, secondary, and also college education here, now being in that field studying English in Korea, I have a lot of mixed feelings, of course. There's a lot of work to be done and perceptions that need to be changed, but also I realize that because it isn't just a one-side effect, I mean, it's very intertwined within society, how our English education has evolved, right? So, and there are many scholars who are at this, who do this work to see what our issues are and how to untangle those ties. So, so what I can say, just short, there's a lot to be done and studied, and going forward for our next generation.
Right. Professor Hayes, there is talk about, some people believe that more needs to be done with regard to perhaps offering Korean language studies to those interested in the language itself overseas. What are your thoughts?
I think that's always a first step. Again, I was a beneficiary of a lot of support, fellowship, scholarship support from Korea Foundation. So coming to Korea, of course, that was part of the training, so both training at Yonsei University and Koryo University. And I think similarly overseas, that is always has to be a part, but there's always limitation. Learning a language, right? Because usually they have up to 18 hours of coursework per week. So is it enough to give them 3 or 4 hours a week in Korean language? And again, the problem is they're not in a context where they can continue to use the language. So it really becomes a kind of rudimentary approach to language. That's why, again, immersion, I think, is ultimately the best way to learn the language. They have to be here, they have to be immersed, and they have to be using the language 24/7.
Right, it's a great opportunity if you could.
Yes, yes. If I could bring them all here, I would bring them all here to learn.
Right. Professor Hayes, what are some of your future plans with regard to the Career Study program?
Of course, this particular summer program moves forward for 2 more summers, so we'll be back, and we learned, as my colleague said, a great deal this summer, so we'll be improving and building upon it. But we would like to really establish Korean Studies program at Gonzaga University as well, in the beginning like a minor studies. So again, Korean language is critical to that, as are courses on Korean politics and economics and history, etc. But in order to do that, we cannot do it ourselves. We really need institutional support. And this is where institutions like the Korea Foundation or our sister institution, Seoul University, those are quite critical to build toward the future. So if we are to be successful, we will need their help. And there's no question about that.
Right, and I'm sure they'll extend it to you. Well, best of luck in your future endeavors, Professor Hayes. And Professor Kang, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you next time.